So this week I was lucky enough to head up to Ducati UK for a media day to try some of their 2022 bikes. Two that I was looking forward to trying, firstly the new Desert X and then also the Multistrada V2S. Very similar bikes in many ways, built upon the same platform, pretty close in price as well, but each with their own individual strengths. And so if you're wondering which one to buy out of the two, then this video is for you. We'll go through each of the key points of difference, and then at the end I'll tell you which one I'd pick if it were my money. But before we get started, a massive thanks to Beeline Moto for sponsoring the channel. Plenty of modern adventure bikes have navigation built in, but if you've got something a little older, like my own Tiger 800, then Beeline Moto is the perfect way to add navigation to your cockpit without having to mount your phone. It's small, it's clean looking, and it fits on any bike. And they've got an awesome app that's easy to use, and it's got some brilliant route planning features. I use mine on pretty much every ride, so I'd thoroughly recommend checking it out through the links in the description. And once again, a massive thanks to Beeline Moto for making these videos possible. Now, first up, let's get the obvious one out of the way, and that's that if you have any inclination at all to ride off-road, then the Desert X is really the only choice. Yes, both bikes get the same Testa Stretta L-twin engine with pretty much the same power output, and yes, there are plenty of shared or similar components, but the Multistrada is almost entirely road focused, whilst the Desert X is properly geared up to be an on and off-road all-round adventure bike. So you've got larger diameter spoke wheels, semi-off-road tires, longer travel suspension, more ground clearance, some off-road specific riding modes, and a taller saddle so that the rider can move between sitting and standing with ease. Clearly it's far superior for riding trails, but then again, plenty of folk buy these types of adventure bikes to do the majority of their riding on the road. So how does the Desert X perform on tarmac? Much like any other off-road biased adventure bike, I rode my own Tiger 800 XCA here today, for example. You know, it's not going to feel as sharp or precise as a slightly road biased bike. You've got the oversized 21-inch front that's going to feel a little more vague. Same for the tires as well. These Pirelli Scorpion Rally STRs are decent on the road, but they're not, you know, dedicated to road riding. It sits a little taller, you don't have the same spec of suspension, and also that keeps the center of gravity a little bit higher as well. So naturally, with all those things combined, it's not gonna feel as sporty as the Multistrada V2. Undoubtedly, out on the road, this is the better handling bike. It's got more appropriate tires, more appropriate wheel sizes, and as a result, it just feels that much quicker and more responsive at the front end. The other thing's the suspension, so it gets semi-active, electronically adjustable suspension with their Skyhook tech. Basically, Skyhook is the concept that the bike itself is suspended from the sky on a hook, and so the chassis should remain level while the suspension and wheels kind of soak up the undulations in the road surface. I've always been mega impressed with it on any bike that I've tried with it, and I think the main benefit that I've noticed is that you can run the suspension pretty soft, so it's got a nice sort of comfy touring feel to it, and yet it doesn't wallow and dive so much when you're on the brakes, or, you know, it doesn't pitch up when you get on the gas, and that's because the Skyhook is constantly keeping the bike level. So the ride and handling are certainly superior on the Multistrada V2. Definitely the one to go for if you're looking for something that's capable of touring, but with a more sporty edge. Now, seat height is a massive deal for some riders. I know a lot of you like to be able to flat foot a bike, and so the Desert X, certainly with its standard seat, might be a pass. First thing I noticed getting on this bike is that it is pretty tall, 875mm in the seat height, and so if you are a little bit shorter or you're not that comfortable with tall bikes, then you're definitely going to want to look at some of the other seat accessories. Moving over to the V2, I'd say it's more comfortable. You get much wider seats for both the rider and passenger, and then the drop in seat height is really quite pronounced at 830mm. Certainly good news for shorter riders, but it does have its drawbacks. I don't know if it's just from jumping off the Desert X, but it feels a bit cramped in the legs. The foot peg position isn't going to be that much different, and yet you've got a substantial reduction in seat height, and so you really do feel like you're squatting down a lot more. And in relation to the bars as well, personally I prefer a little bit more space, especially if I'm touring and doing long distances. It's nice to have a nice open knee angle as much as possible anyway, and so I think if I went for this bike, I'd probably look at the high seat option, even though I'm not super tall. Now, fortunately, you've got loads of different height configurations for both of these bikes, so not only seat accessories, but also suspension kits. But of course, those are going to add to the cost of the bike, and so in standard form, for me, the Desert X is easily the pick of the two for that extra space and stretched out leg position that I think is way more comfortable over distance. Speaking of which, fuel range is of course a massive deal when you're touring, and the Desert X has a massive advantage here. Well, sort of. On this bike, we've got a 20-litre tank, so decent, and I think plenty enough. On the Desert X, you've got the 21-litre tank, so pretty much the same, but there is the option for an 8-litre fuel pod accessory that goes on the subframe. Once the main tank reaches half, I think, you can then select through the switchgear and dash to pump in more fuel from the extra pod. The only thing that's a little bit contradictory about it is that it means that you can't fit luggage because you've got the fuel pod accessory on. So it's only really good if you're doing like a day-long ride where you're going to go somewhere remote and you might not be able to fuel up, then it's absolutely great. But if you're buying that bike thinking about doing long distance touring, then yeah, that's not really a selling point of it because you're probably going to have to take luggage. So yeah, they are a bit illogical. Perhaps they just felt pressure to offer the fuel pods to the market because they were one of the standout features of the concept bike, which generated loads of hype after it was launched at EICMA in 2019. The other thing that contributed to that was the sort of semi-retro Cagiva elephant inspired looks, and it's definitely a great looking bike, which is no doubt going to be a big selling point for some owners. Personally, I really like this aesthetic and style of bike, the more sort of blocky, chunky and robust looking machines. And then there's also a little bit of something that you can't quite put your finger on, but I think it's the ability to sort of ride anywhere, the potential of it. The idea that you could just set off down a gravel track, even if you don't do it that often, is a big part of the adventure bike ownership experience. And with the Desert X specifically, you know, it's set up to do that really well. It's a proper all-rounder. Now that's not to say the Multi V2 is a bad looking bike. It certainly has more of that typical sporty Ducati look to it, which is going to be preferable to some, but I just like that two-wheeled Jeep sort of look and feel of the Desert X. And I think that's why it'd be my pick of the two. The price isn't massively different on these bikes, so it wouldn't play a big part in my purchasing decision. And while the Multi is certainly the better road bike and it has that brilliant skyhook suspension, the Desert X has the versatility and the looks and also that taller stance that I really like. As always though, I'd love to know which one you'd pick down in the comments below, so do let me know. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you in the next one.